Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to see you today, and I am happy to introduce our speakers who will be presenting on a topic that is particularly relevant during Women's History Month and also resonates with what has been happening in Albany. Tanya Selvaratnam is an activist, filmmaker, producer, and author. In early 2018, Tanya made a life-changing decision to come forward to share her story of abuse committed by the then Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, which was published in a groundbreaking article in the New Yorker in May of 2018. Her memoir, Assume Nothing, A Story of Intimate Violence, was released last month and takes the reader through her deeply personal experience. Jennifer Friedman is Sanctuary for Families Director of Family Law Practice at the Bronx and Manhattan Family Justice Centers. Jennifer was introduced to Tanya through a mutual friend and worked with her as counsel and advocate throughout this experience. Jennifer collaborated with Tanya on the appendix to the book, contributing a domestic violence overview so that readers can become educated and understand the warning signs of abuse. If you have any questions you'd like to ask Tanya or Jennifer, please use the chat function and we will try to answer them at the end of the presentation. I will now turn this over to Jennifer and Tanya for what I know will be a stimulating and provocative conversation.
Thank you so much, Judy. This is really very special for me to bring Tanya into the Sanctuary for Families family, into the fold. And I just want to acknowledge and thank so many members of our community for being here. I saw the RSVP list and I see supporters, I see survivor leaders, and many staff joining us here today. So really special to have this combination of our family here at Sanctuary to introduce Tanya, who has become a friend, collaborator, partner in crime. So really pleased to bring her to us today. So welcome, Tanya. And I do just, of course, want to acknowledge that there will be some hard topics talked about today. So that's just a little, those of you who might be triggered by anything we're going to talk about, just wanted to say that before we start off. So Tanya, I have learned so much from you and our partnership, and it's been a journey for you. And I just wanted to start off, kind of jump in and say, and we actually had known each other for many years peripherally, but that day you made a phone call to a mutual friend and shared some of your story with her. And she called me and said, Jen, I have a friend who really needs to speak with you. And I said, okay, you know, I'm always happy to speak with anyone. And she said, well, this is a little different. I think you really need to talk to her now. It's about Eric Schneiderman. And then we started to talk. Can you tell us where you were on your journey at that time?
It was that conversation with my friend, who's like my sister, our mutual friend, that completely changed, I think, the trajectory of my life. She could sense that I was having a hard time. Many friends sensed that I was having a hard time. And she reached out and asked very casually, hey, do you want to talk? And she started asking questions. And eventually she got to a question that blew my mind in the moment. That was so simple. Does he hit you? And I wasn't going to lie to her. And I said, yes. And she, knowing that she didn't have the skills and expertise to take the conversation from there, said, would you be willing to speak with a friend of mine who's a domestic violence expert? And because you and I had already met, as you mentioned, peripherally before, I felt comfortable talking to you, because for many, many months, I had not felt comfortable talking to anyone, even my closest friends, about what I had been experiencing for a variety of reasons. but it was that conversation with our mutual friend, and then my conversation with you, when you asked me to tell you about my experience from beginning to end. And when you said that it was classic and that I probably wasn't the only one who had experienced this with him, the scales fell off of my eyes and everything changed, and there was no looking back as far as that relationship. And then it just became about how to get out safely and move forward.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. And I remember in particular, you telling me, I asked you, tell me what's happening. What is he doing? And I remember you telling me about strangulation that was happening. And I said, wow, Tanya, I'm worried about you. That's really scary to me. And I think we talked even in that conversation about lethality and my concern. What was that like for you?
To talk about it was painful and uncomfortable, but because you were asking questions, I was answering them as straightforwardly as possible. And when I started talking with more people about it, I was shocked to discover how many other women, regardless of where they come from, what they did, what they looked like, how many had also experienced the choking and slapping and spitting in the sexual context that I had. And I felt like, what is it in our conditioning that tells men that that is something they can do in the bedroom, and that women feel they have to be silent about? So that was what that moment felt like to me: painful and uncomfortable, but also really eye-opening and crucial, because those micro details, as humiliating and embarrassing as they are really important to share, because they help understand the full complexity of the situation. And in that particular instance, it was especially damning because, as you and I discussed, Eric Schneiderman had co-authored some of the legislation on strangulation.
Right. I mean, it was mind blowing to me because I was aware of the political advocacy that he had done and the strangulation legislation that actually Sanctuary for Families had collaborated on with him. And I mean, just that something you and I have talked a lot about is the two-sidedness of someone who could, in public, say the words and project himself as a feminist. And then for this to be going on at the same time. And I know you've talked about that two-sidedness as well.
Well, the bifurcated individual, it's not an unusual phenomenon, but it's especially shocking when there's such a cognitive dissonance between what a person presents themselves as publicly and how they behave privately. And we've seen that in abundance, those stories, because of the Me Too and Time's Up movements. And with Eric, it was a pattern of, I think, on the one hand, wanting to do the right thing, and on the other hand, a form of deflection to have this public facing, progressive feminist persona. Also, at the time that you and I connected, it was shortly before the Me Too movement began.
Mm-hmm.
And that timing was overwhelming.
So I want to get to that in a minute. I want to just have you educate us a little bit for a moment. You know, you've mentioned that the violence was taking place in the bedroom, and you've named your book "Assume Nothing: A Story of Intimate Violence," and you've used the term intimate violence. Can you talk about why you choose that terminology?
Well, I wanted to be very laser focused on intimate violence in committed relationships. And in my case, specifically the physical violence that took place in the bedroom, but then also the coercive control and the demeaning behavior, the psychological abuse that happened in the bedroom and outside of the bedroom. So
Right. So there's both going on. So, and I also want to acknowledge again, which is just so important for me, to acknowledge how brave it is to disclose these incredibly painful personal experiences to us, to the world, and how grateful I am to you for that. Because it is really important that the survivor stories come out and that they not stay, locked in that bedroom.
Well, I'm grateful to you, because if you and I hadn't connected, who knows where I would have been, where I would be now. I mean, that was like one of the beautiful parts. My favorite scenes in the book are the scenes of sisterhood, and how there were so many strong women who helped me, also a strong woman, but that at that time very broken down, like helped me pick myself up off the floor and keep on moving and keep on showing up. I had to show up. And as far as like sharing the details in the book that are painful, I really felt it was important, because too many people sugarcoat their negative experiences because we've been conditioned to. And I wanted to give the reader multiple entry points. And it has been beautiful and also saddening to receive so many notes from people, strangers and friends, sharing their own stories and sharing how similar some of their experiences have been.
Yeah. So you, going back for a second, something that has happened, and this is a comment a little bit for inside the Beltway folks, for the sanctuary folks, that somehow over the course of time, there's been like two roads that have diverged a little bit within serving survivors. And there's kind of domestic violence, and some people say, well, there's sexual assault, and there's different agencies. There's actually different lines of funding for agencies. But what I see in the cases that I work on is that these things are very, very closely connected, and that the vast, vast majority of my clients, I don't know, 85%, I can't even put a percentage on it, but are have experienced both, that these are overlapping forms of abuse. Do you have any thoughts for those of us in the field around acknowledging the incidence of sexual assault within intimate violence?
Well, domestic violence takes many forms. And one of the reasons I subtitled my book Intimate Violence is I wanted to make it clear that it's a subset of domestic violence, a subset of intimate partner violence. This physical violence and emotional violence that happens in the sexual context. But with domestic violence and sexual assault is also an aspect of domestic violence, not manifested in all cases, but certainly in some cases, and certainly in mine. And also with the other women, I'm now aware of 9. There were 4 that were in the New Yorker. There are many surprises in the book about other women I discovered were victims of his after the New Yorker story came out. And since my book came out, I've heard from 2 other women, and both described him whacking them. And one needed surgery to repair an injury that he had caused.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, sexual assault, I mean, we're heading into Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I think it is incredibly important that sexual assault happens in committed relationships.
And Tanya, since you just mentioned it, the impact on you when you found out that there were other victims. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, as you know, because we were talking almost every day at that point, I had no intention of coming forward. And I was really focused on recovering and being able to look back at that time down the road and say, well, that was a really painful thing that I went through, and I'm on the other side. And I've been through hard times before. Nothing like that. I've never been in an abusive relationship before, but I had dealt with infertility, with cancer, with divorce. So I just thought, okay, just another one of these painful experiences that are the, sum of our lives. Uh, and I also thought that the abuse was specific to me. And I remember you and I having many conversations about that, because abusers are very skilled at customizing their abuse and making you feel that you have sparked it. Also, I was very much duped by Eric Schneiderman in particular, because he was still friends with his ex-wife. And I realized, of course, in retrospect, that she was very much a cover for him.
Mhm.
And they had been divorced for about 20 years at that point. And she was a close advisor of his. And he always referred to his ex-girlfriends as crazy women or shark women, and that I was different from them. So when the abuse started emerging and started escalating, especially after the election in 2016, because his drinking was increasing and the pressure on him was increasing, he was more in the national spotlight. It was kind of like when, he was getting too close to the flame. And so I was the one that he was closest to take things out on.
Mhm.
So when I got out of it, I really did not realize that I was part of a pattern. But then what happened is, after he and I parted ways, about a month later, you had been very careful to tell me not to worry about my belongings, because I had, although I still had my place, my own apartment, thank goodness, that I could escape to, I had, for the most part, been living with him. And many of my things were at his place. But you said, don't worry about your things. They're not important. One day you'll get them, and you'll get them when you're ready to get them. And when you do go get them, make sure he's not there, and make sure you go with a friend. So I did that. About a month later, a friend actually offered to come with me. And that friend happens to be an investigative reporter. And she's amazing. And within 24 hours less, I remember it was a Saturday morning, she texted me that she had some info. Can I talk? And so I called her immediately. And she had already identified a previous girlfriend of Eric's who had an eerily similar experience. And that woman had dated him almost a decade before me. And so that's when I realized that if there was her and me, then there were probably others in between us. And then what really helped me kind of cement my decision to come forward is when I heard from a mutual friend of mine and Eric's that Eric was asking him to introduce him to women because it was hard for Eric to meet women in the line of work that he did. And I thought, I won't use expletives on this Zoom, but I thought that is going to do something. He's going to abuse the next woman too. And so then it was like a process of deliberation. And I think, I would like to hear you talk about the different avenues that we explored.
I was going to get to that. So kind of circling back, you know, we connected, and I learned about how much danger I actually felt that you were in. And, but I also was very aware that the physical abuse was only happening when you two were together. And we worked very closely on safety planning. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that looked like for you and how important you think that is for other people, and how to extricate yourself in a way that was very specific to your circumstance.
Well, while abuse is sadly very, very common, intimate partner violence, of course, is very, very common. Every victim is unique. And what you and I discussed is how important it was to customize a safety plan based on my unique circumstances. And in my situation, uh, what was most daunting was that my abuser was the top law enforcement officer in New York State. And so he did have resources that he could deploy to intimidate me. And I would find out later from previous girlfriends that he did, for instance, hover around them with his security detail, push them, etc., after they had parted ways. And even though I was not scared with him because I was out, I was weak when I was with him. I felt strong again when I was out, but I was also in survival mode. And
Tanya, he had made you, it wasn't just that you knew he was the top law enforcement official in the state of New York. He had said things to you, getting back to that power and control. He had used threats, used intimidation. He had said, can you tell us some of the things that he had said to you to make you keenly aware of the power differential there?
He said, you know, I could have your phone tapped. You know, I could have you followed. And on a number of occasions, he said, if we break up, am I going to have to kill you?
These are the same. So of course, with the power that he had at his disposal, it was so unique and particular. But those threats, so many survivors are, the threat to kill is a very real threat. And, you know, people, this has been discussed a lot actually recently in the media, you know, the question, why does she stay? And whether that's an appropriate question and flipping that around. But what are the barriers to leaving? Well, fear of serious harm, fear of an attempt to kill, that is a very real fear. And I thank you for talking about that threat, because that was very real to you. And it also, it maintains the power and control. When you look at domestic violence and the power and control that's going on, that threat hovers above everything. You know, as do many of the other emotional, you know, we have that wheel that we use, the wheel of in domestic violence, and there's intimidation, minimizing, isolation, and the belittling, which you've talked about in your book. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about all of the different emotional abuse that you were subjected to, which was maintaining that power and control.
Well, there were the racist invectives that he would use against me in the bedroom that are embarrassing to talk about, but I think they're important to talk about. He would want me to call him daddy or master. He would call me his slave. He had fantasies of finding me far away as this brown girl to bring back to America. I mean, it was flat out racist. That was what was also shocking, because he, public facing, was such an advocate of vulnerable communities. And I have a scar that runs down my torso from cancer surgery. And when we first started dating, he would look at my scars. It was a badge of courage, as if I had overcome adversity. But then as the months went by, he wanted me to get plastic surgery to remove my scars. And he even told me the name of the plastic surgeon whom he would have do it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes he would look at my hair, you know, in the summertime when it's humid, my hair gets big and I love it. But he would say that my hair looked wild. And he wanted me to always wear it up or to straighten it. And also just dressing a particular way. I would remember, you know, in the early days, before it got very, very dark with him, I would say to my friends, you know, I'm wearing this because he wants me to. This isn't something I would wear. And my friends vividly remember those moments. And then as time went on and his drinking increased, and my friends started noticing that I was more subdued in the relationship. And that was the word that one who's like my sister said, you seem subdued in the relationship. What's going on? And I would say, you know, he's depressed. I'm trying to help him. And I was trying to help him. I tried to get him to speak to a therapist. He knew that he was behaving badly. He knew that he had addiction issues. And he kept saying that he was going to work on himself. So I, being a woman and an empathetic person and sensitive, wanted to help him. And I was hopeful that he would get better. Also, he surrounded himself with meditators, with spiritual teachers. And he was often going to meditation retreats, as you know. And so I was duped by them as well.
Yeah. So much of what you're talking about resonates for I'm for those listening. I'm sure that just that description of all of the belittling, and it was very, you know, there are kind of particular patterns that you know, for people like me who talk to a lot of people, and you and I shared, that I had experience early, a long time ago in my life with someone who was abusive to me, primarily emotionally, and that I really related. There was so much about the way that Eric treated you that I just said, I know this guy. I know what you're talking about. What was that like, that sharing? That's not something I share all the time, but what was that like for you and in terms of our relationship?
When I say the scenes of sisterhood, that's like a scene of sisterhood. It's like by sharing our stories, we recognize the so much more that we have in common, which is that most women I know have some experience with abuse, assault, harassment, and we need to share these stories with each other because they bring us closer to each other. And I also believe you, by sharing your story, you might save somebody's life. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to come forward, not with any kind of like lofty ideal that that was going to be the case, but it was very important for me in participating in the New Yorker story and then also in writing the book, not only to provide resources for people to spot, stop, and prevent intimate violence in their own lives, but also to show them that they can go from being a victim to a survivor to a thriver, and that there are organizations like Sanctuary for Families that can help them do that. So the book has also a lot of light, even though it's a dark subject.
It
So
does.
yeah, there's a
It
lot of
does.
magic in the book.
It does. I wanted to just circle back before we moved on, to appreciating that you named the racism that occurred. I think that it's so important that we recognize all of the different tools in the arsenal that abusers use, and they will use whatever is at their disposal: male privilege, white privilege, and they know how it's going to. They find a point of vulnerability, and that is part of what I think was so insidious about Eric's MO with you, is that you felt like it was specific to you, which undermined the sisterhood, which is kind of anti-organizing, individuate people, separate them, you know, isolate them. And we know that what we need is collectivism, sisterhood, collaboration, in fighting misogyny and sexism and racism. So thank you for naming that and bringing that forward. I think it's really important. So that's not a question, that's a statement. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, keep going.
So, you know, one of the things that you also talked about is, so we connected in roughly September. And then October, Weinstein came out. And I mean, here I am talking with you. We're literally, how can you get your stuff? How can you get out of this relationship? And we strategized a soft extrication that was not getting an order of protection. We talked about all the different options: order of protection, going to the police, all of the things that we discuss always in safety planning. And we felt that for someone who was so public facing, that just essentially like breaking up slowly, getting out was the safest. And then you could make further decisions from a place of safety once you got out of that. And so that happened, and it was very effective, and thank God. And it was wonderful that it was relatively smooth. And then Me Too starts happening right in the middle. And there's Weinstein, and there's all these names in the news. And how did that affect you?
It was overwhelming. I felt waves crash around me the day that the Weinstein story broke. And as you probably remember, on the day that Ronan Farrow's story broke in the New Yorker, Eric Schneiderman reached out to me by email And he said, I want to continue to support your good work. These are not normal times. And I sent that email to you. And can you remember what our conversation was?
I do. I remember we were saying, this is some CYA stuff right here. He is really worried that you are going to come forward. I mean, I think that's, and it was not a coincidence. Each time there was a really big news story, he would find a reason to connect with you. Yeah.
Well, also because it's not my nature to have you helped me kind of strategize the soft exit, which essentially amounted to me kind of ghosting him, drifting to the point where it would become absurd if we didn't part ways. So like not returning his phone calls, not responding, although sometimes there was one 24-hour period when I was in LA for work and he called me 3 times in a 24-hour period, and more agitated each time that he couldn't get a hold of me, even though we were already on, I thought, on the rocks at that point. But he wanted to know if we were having dinner that week. And I just responded saying, no, I'm traveling. And then I just kept drifting. And when he and I had that call that he wanted to have, he started by saying, it seems like you've been avoiding me. And I was like, yeah, I just need time. Like, I remember you and I scripted different scenarios. Like, the ideal one is that he parts ways with you, because then he has control over the situation, or you might have to initiate it. But whatever the conversation is, just to make sure that I have an exit plan out of the exit so that I was not stuck on the phone with him. And
I remember one thing we did was we kind of inserted, because he's a lawyer, like language around harassment into, you said, like, I think it's best if we don't communicate right now. I'd really appreciate if you not communicate with me. And you kept on reminding him that you didn't want him to communicate with, and I think I can't even remember the language exactly, but it was around like, he knows what harassment is. And you were kind of saying, step back. And it was a way of signaling, I'm going to consider this harassment if you don't step back.
yes, and that was in the book as well. And I remember, can we talk about well, it's in the book, so I think we can talk about it. When you wanted me to meet with Dorchen.
Yes. So this is so Dorchen Leithold. Many people on the call know that is the director of our legal center. And I was giving Tanya extensive legal advice for quite some time. And I had gotten Tanya's permission to also speak with Dorchen, who was a trusted colleague, because I said, wow, this is pretty big, and I'd like to have a team, so we met with Dorchen, and in fact, we met at a firm in Midtown.
But say first about how I gave you permission to talk to Dorchen about the situation, but you weren't going to disclose who it was.
Oh God. Go ahead.
But then how Dorchen figured it out.
Right. Well, because of the address. Because
No. The you and Dorchen were having a conversation, and she was trying to piece together who the abuser was in my story, because you were just telling her that it was a high-profile politician, I think, right?
Yeah.
And she started to like connect the dots and name different people, and then like a light bulb went off.
That's right.
Can you talk about that? Because that moment is like, wow.
So she had worked with him. She had worked with him on the strangulation legislation, and she just said, it's him, isn't it? And you had said you gave me permission to tell her if, kind of it got to that point. And she said, I always thought there was something funny about him. This is Dorchen. I don't know if you're on, but I hope I'm not revealing. This is a double hearsay now. But she had thought, what, and specifically, and then we looked back and we found photographs and of Dorchen, I believe Judy, at press conferences with him, and it was just the light bulb of wow.
Mm-hmm. And then when we met with Dorchen, Originally, we were going to meet at.
Right. And so we had to pick a different location. So we had to move our location. It just all felt like there were so many coincidences that were not coincidences, that were just overlapping in at that time.
Well, it did for me really exacerbate how trapped I felt. Like all roads led to him. That it was going to be that I just needed to have as much armor around me if I were going to be safe. Not that I necessarily feared for my physical safety, but I just know too many people who've been in relationships with very powerful men who still live in mortal fear of them.
Yeah.
And I believe that you cannot anticipate what an abusive person will do if they snap. They might be fine, very skilled at concealing their hidden behaviors, but when they feel it's all going to fall apart, what might they do?
Well, 100%, Tanya. And this is why the data we know that victims are killed when they leave. And why is that? Back to power and control. They've lost control. So the controller losing control is something that we are very concerned about. And making sure, we often are counseling survivors as they're extricating themselves, going to shelter, talking about where they will be when maybe an order of protection is served, physically, where, and how to protect their safety. I wanted to, speaking of the person losing control and going public, I wanted to talk about, we have so many things to talk about. I wanted to talk about the article for a minute in the New Yorker, and then about your book. So you were working with Jane Mayer and Ronan Farrow, and I just want to say that you did a huge amount of your own investigation and pretty much gave them a lot of the story. Tanya was incredibly proactive, and what that was like for you when the article came out. I will say I was really honored to be a part, that I was able to speak with Jane Mayer and give her a little bit of a DV 101, like an understanding. She was asking me these questions initially that were like around, like, is it just private behavior? Is this really relevant to the public? And I said, can we go off the record? Because I really feel like, I don't want you to quote me. I just want to explain some stuff to you. And I felt like she got it. And the article was so transformative, I felt, in really explaining what power and control is and coercive control is. And how did it feel for you?
Well, I trusted in David Remnick, the editor of the New Yorker, and I trusted Jane Mayer and Ronan Farrow. I had made a conscious decision beforehand that I was going to let the story speak for itself. I was not going to do any follow-up media, and I was going to hide. In fact, I had booked a ticket to leave the country because I did not know how the story would land. And if it did not land well, and if he were still in power, I was scared that he would come after me, or that the people around him would come after me, including his female enablers. I call them the white female patriarchs, of which he had many. And they are some of the most powerful women in America. And it's sad. And I do feel like the next wave of the Me Too movement is not only exposing more intimate violence in committed relationships, but also calling out the enablers, female and male. Because until we call out the enablers, we won't chip away at the ecosystem that normalizes this type of violence and normalizes the patriarchy. When the story did come out, I had already moved out of my apartment. I had been given a heads up that it would be any day now. I was having nightmares before the story came out, that a fact checker called and told me that it was asking me a series of questions and made it clear to me that Eric Schneiderman was denying all of the allegations. I asked the fact checker, did he deny that he hit me? Yes. Did he deny that he slapped me? That he took prescription drugs, was addicted? Yes. And then the fact checker in my dream says to me, ma'am, be careful as you walk home. And that dream really haunted me in those days before the story came out. And I was very fortunate that I could go and stay with a friend and with her family. So I felt like I was in a cocoon. Nobody knew where I was. I did not read the story for many, many hours after it came out because I didn't want to. The friend I was staying with did read it, and I had a couple of people, well, I had a lot of people trying to call and text, but some specifically said, you have nothing to be ashamed about with regard to the story. And then when I got a heads up that he was going to resign, that Eric Schneiderman was going to resign within a few hours of the story coming out, which was unprecedented, then I felt I felt a slight sense of relief. So that's what it was like.
It brings me back. In fact, you were not responding to the media, but what was amazing, and this is a whole, I feel like we could have a 3-hour conversation, because I mean, it's all coming back. So you had an amazing team. I was a member of the team, but there was also Robbie Kaplan, and Gavin DeBecker was involved and helped you with security. And there was a PR person.
Team.
Sorry?
It wasn't Gavin himself. It was people from
his team. And there was a PR guy whose name I've completely forgotten now, apologies. But at any rate, there were this group of people, and we were like the media was calling us instead of calling you, which was amazing, that you had that distance. But it was like this real-time scroll of just the article came out, and then it was like every news outlet picked it up, and it was this incredibly fast pitched kind of intensity. And then he resigned. Of course, he also put out a statement that was ridiculous, saying that this had been consensual, and which I think, I mean, how did you feel about that statement? I think
I wasn't surprised, nor was I surprised by the statement that his ex-wife put out.
Yeah, saying this never happened.
He's not the man I know. I find these allegations impossible. But
and thank you, by the way,
that she has a story too.
Of the enablers, of which you have described her as one. Thank you for naming also the patriarchy. I love that word is back in the lexicon now. I think it's so important because it's structural. It's not one individual, and individual. I mean, it is one individual. I mean, he was an individual with you, but what I mean is that these are structures of power that we need to dismantle. It's not just about individual behavior. It's about a patriarchy, a structure that people are fitting into. So thank you for naming that as well. I want to quickly, because I'm afraid that we're running out of, I want to make sure we have a chance for people to ask you questions. I do have your book right here. And I hope that folks will read it, will buy it, will tweet about it, will share on social media about it. I think it's in our chat. And if it's not already, it's going to be soon. This book is amazing. There's so much of you in it. I just read, I mean, it's you, it's your voice and your experience. I was, really honored to participate in the appendix, which gives resources to survivors, which is so important. Tell us just a little bit about the decision to write it, and also what's next for you.
Well, I wrote the book to write my way out of the darkness. I am a writer. I'm grateful that I'm a writer, that I have that outlet. And as someone who was a shy child and an introvert, I was always writing things out. And what inspired me to write this particular book is I had so many people reaching out to me after the New Yorker story broke. And I wanted to write a book for them. I wondered, why aren't we talking about this when there are so many of us who have these experiences? And I did kind of a cursory search for books on this particular topic, on intimate violence. And I I felt that it would be important to add one that was a very personal story, that takes the reader through the stages that I went through to get entangled in an abusive relationship, but then halfway through the script gets flipped when I have more agency over my life and my body and also the narrative, and how I reached a point where after going through really deep darkness, I found my light. And I hope that the book helps others find their light too. It was very important for me that it also not just be a memoir, but that it also be a resource. And I wanted it to not feel, there's so much out there that are academic papers on this issue, reporting and research. I wanted to write something that was personal to draw the reader in with the narrative, but then help them emerge with so many resources to help themselves and also to help their loved ones so that they could be a lifeline to their loved ones who might be in an abusive relationship.
I just wanted to show, I mean, it's a little hard to see and maybe not worth it, but there's the way that you constructed the chapters is entrap, isolate, control, demean, abuse, and then it flips, extraction, the pattern, coming forward. I mean, it's so instructive. It's really, I love the way that you wove in helping people understand. And then what we did in the end, which I love the way it looks, there's all of these resources. It's just resource after resource, national, specific to different communities, which is so important. And then we worked on, I mean, it's really a DV 101, types of abuse, controlling behavior, quick involvement, in all of what we know. So I'm so grateful that you put this book out into the world, combining your personal experience with something that can really help individual survivors and, you know, bring the dynamic. It's not just, oh, this happens. There is a dynamic. It's about power and control. There are these aspects to it that are, I won't say universal, but are so common to so many survivors. So thank you for that and for coming forward with your story.
Well, thank you for being a part of my story and for working with me on the appendix, because
what's next? You just have to say what's next, because this is
it's been optioned. The book has been optioned by ABC Signature Disney Television. Joanna Coles is executive producing. We'll be making some exciting announcements about it soon. And I just have to ask, Jen, who's going to play you?
Tanya asked me this the other day. My kids got a real kick out of that question. I don't know. We'll have to talk about that offline. But people can put that in the chat. Who do we think
should play Jen?
we should play me. That's funny. And actually, Tanya, I have to. I feel like I have to say this because I kind of outed myself. And I told you this big irony that my long ago abusive partner had said to me in a very narcissistic moment many, many years ago. In the story of that means his life. In the story of his life, who would play him and who would play me, the backup to him. So I like that I'm actually going to be played in the story of your life, being empowered. So that's a nice turnaround. I do want to introduce Lisa Mueller, who is our director at Sanctuary for Families of, Jodie Foster. Oh, awesome, I love that. Robin Wright. So Lisa Mueller, I think, is going to join us. She has been reading through the Q&A, and she, I think, has some questions from our audience to pose to you, Tanya.
Great. Thanks so much, Jennifer. And I just want to start by saying what an incredibly rich conversation that was. I feel like that you took us on the journey in a really beautiful and very intimate way. So thank you both for sharing. And Tanya, again, on behalf of everybody in our audience, thank you so much for sharing your story and writing such a critically important book. So there are a million questions, and I know we just have time for a few. One is, and you sort of touched on this, I think so many people who are leaving an abusive relationship, they're afraid of retribution. They're afraid of what he's going to do. And that lasts year after year after year. So do you know where Eric is? Are you in touch with him at all? And are you still fearful of what he could do? And I guess a related question is also what you think should he ever hold public office again, or has what he done banned him from ever holding public trust again?
I mean, in terms of what would justice look like for me, I think that he should be disbarred. I think that he misused his office. That's not for me to decide, but that I think would be a suitable outcome. Um, and but you know, I am somebody who believes in redemption. I believe in second chances. If the abuser does the hard work to outroot their abusive behavior and acknowledges the harm that they have inflicted, then we can give them a second chance. But in most cases, the abuser doesn't do any of that. So yeah, that's what I think justice would look like. Have I been in touch with him? No. I'm sure his lawyers have told him not to be in touch with me. He was in touch with me, as Jen knows, up until right before the story came out. He would reach out to me periodically, wanting to talk, urgent messages, needing to talk to me. At one point, he wanted to take me to an event. He wanted to take me to the Grammy Awards when they were in New York that year. And I just thought, wow,
Wow.
does he really think I'm that stupid? It also gave me even more courage because it showed me that he didn't know what I was thinking. He didn't know that I was already speaking with the New Yorker.
Wow. That is staggering. Right. Was there any, did you ever think about bringing charges against him formally?
Uh, Not I myself. I felt that the legal system would do its work. And in fact, there were subsequent legal investigations launched after the New Yorker story happened. The outcome was reached in November of 2018. The special prosecutor, DA Madeline Singas, I had met with her and her team. I found them to be very empathetic, very thorough. And she made a very strong statement when the investigation was concluded that because of statutes of limitations and the bar at which many of these allegations become a crime, that she was not going to press criminal charges, but that she believes the women and that she was proposing legislation to make this type of abusive behavior in the bedroom without consent to make it legally actionable. So I thought that was a very positive outcome at the time. Of course, now hearing from other girlfriends that Eric has abused, I've heard from 4 since in the last year and a half. I do think he should have been charged.
To prevent behavior, right? So perhaps the elephant in the room and what many, many people are asking is how this relates to current events. So obviously our governor, there are many, many allegations being brought against our governor for his behavior. And can you just talk a little bit about how you're personally reacting to that and how that ties to your experience?
I could not have anticipated the timing that my book would come out the same time that the allegations against Cuomo would come out. Harm is harm, but it's very important to delineate between the types of harm. So what I experienced was intimate violence in a committed relationship. The allegations about Cuomo are of sexual harassment and workplace harassment, the classic kind of diminishing of a woman's worth. Some of the allegations, one in particular is about grooming for sex, potentially, and another one is about groping. And I have been frustrated by the media coverage around this. I felt it has been irresponsible. The drip of stories just allows Cuomo to dig in his heels more. And I wish that there had been a thorough investigation to establish a pattern of these allegations before they had become public. I've been disappointed in the way some of these stories have emerged in these first person narratives. That's just, it's my opinion. I'm being very blunt. I look forward to the outcome of the independent investigation. I am very grateful that it's Letitia James who's overseeing it and not Eric Schneiderman, because Eric Schneiderman and both Cuomo had very damaging information on each other. Cuomo knew about Eric's violent behavior years before I dated Eric, so it would have been an inherently compromised investigation. But depending on what the facts show, appropriate action should be taken. I think that Rebecca Traister and Michael Schneerson's pieces, to me, finally, and those just happened last week, finally did the work that I felt the media should have been doing all along, which is looking at the whole ecosystem, not just of Cuomo's behavior, but the whole ecosystem that normalizes that type of alleged behavior. And if people haven't read those pieces, I strongly encourage it, because it's not just about the diminishing of women's worth, but it's also about the bullying behavior, the bullying of the Assemblyman Kim to conceal the data on nursing homes, and the backdoor deals and cronyism and corruption. So I think we have to look at kind of like the whole picture and not this drip, drip, drip of individual stories.
Yeah, and Tanya, if I could just kind of compare and contrast for a second, the New Yorker story that was so thoroughly and comprehensively investigated by Jane Mayer and Ronan Farrow took 4 different, I think it was 4 ultimately, women's stories and fact checked them and brought them out together so that you could see the whole. You could see, and I think that that's the compare and contrast to like, now this person's saying this person's saying this, and it's a little bit harder to really understand, like you're saying, the ecosystem of what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I wish the people making the allegations felt more responsibility to the greater good and the greater cause. And I wish that the media were also feeling that bigger responsibility. You have to be patient with the process. It can't be about you.
Absolutely. Well, and I should also note for all of you in the audience, Tanya wrote a very powerful essay in Cosmopolitan at the beginning of the month when the allegations first started coming out, which Jennifer Friedman also commented in. So we'll circulate that also either in the chat or in our follow-up. So I'm so sorry we are out of time. Again, there are so many other questions, but I just want to thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer to close. This was really just such an honor, Tanya, to have you with us this past hour.
Well, I mean, what can I say, Tanya? Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for joining us at Sanctuary and for giving of yourself over and over again. We all benefit from hearing from you. I do just I have to put in a pitch for your book one more time that I hope that folks will not just read it, but will share it on their social media. I think it has such an important message and is such a conversation starter. And these are the conversations that we need to be having. And so it needs to get out there. Oprah, are you listening? It needs to get on Oprah's list. So all of the supporters out there who have your feeds, put it in your feeds, etc. And also, of course, I wouldn't be doing my duty if I didn't say, for those of you who are not already Sanctuary supporters, to go to our website. That may also be in the chat. There are so many ways to support Sanctuary. We have our annual benefit coming up and other ways. So please consider supporting us and all of the survivors who we serve who need our help. So thank you, Tanya. Thank you to everyone who participated. This has been a real pleasure.